We break it down next. All eyes are on the Middle East as we wait to see Iran's next move, but trouble could be lurking in the shadows with our other adversaries like China and Russia. One man with his finger on the pulse of events all around the globe is our good friend Dr. Rod D. Martin. He's CEO of Martin Capital and founder of the Rod Martin Report, a great source for insight on domestic and global issues. Rod joins us now. Rod, hey, things ramping up, obviously. We'll talk in a minute about Israel, the U.S., and what comes next with Iran. Obviously, President Trump meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House yesterday. But in the meantime, with all the focus on Iran, what are China and Russia up to? Let's start with China. You just wrote a great piece, Rod, today. China is in the midst of a massive nuclear buildup. Tell us more about it and why we should be concerned.
Well, they are, and this has to be understood in the context of the end of the New START Treaty, which is the last big nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and the Russians. That treaty limited both sides to 1,500 weapons. That being the case, it makes it much, much harder for either side to go to war, and that's been the status quo more or less since the end of the Cold War. China has never been part of that. China has never entered into any of these arms control treaties with us or the Russians, and all of a sudden it's building up like mad. They have tripled their number of nuclear warheads in the last decade. They say they're on track to increase that by another 250%. This is really destabilizing for this key reason. We haven't had to worry about them before, but now, because you're talking about that many weapons, if theoretically they ganged up with the Russians, they would have twice as many weapons they could fire at the United States as the United States could fire at them. And that could potentially force a surrender without war.
Yeah, Rod, the communist regime in Beijing is in the midst right now, really, of the largest military and nuclear buildup, arguably, since World War II. But what's the regime's motivation with this buildup? A message to the United States, who they are targeting as their great adversary and the force, really, they need to overthrow and supplant to become that global power.
Yeah, they're not really that interested in the messaging as they are in the dominance. You know, they see themselves as the Middle Kingdom, and we know that term. That's the usual and customary English translation of the Chinese term for China. But what it really means is the Central Kingdom. They are the center of the universe from their own point of view, and they're very open about it. They're very clear about it, and this is rooted deeply in Confucian thought going back thousands of years. This is a country that sees its rightful place as dominating everything it surveys. So the nuclear buildup is part of that. It's also part of offsetting the depopulation crisis that is well underway. It is a moment in time that is incredibly dangerous. This next decade, they really have to grab everything they can, or they're not going to have the demographic ability to grab those things. And the timing is not accidental. So it is very concerning.
The Maduro capture, obviously, now possible action against Iran. China and Russia and other adversaries, North Korea also, they have to be taking notes right now, watching this very closely. If President Trump agrees to a deal with the Ayatollahs, is that a sign of weakness, do you think? After his promises that Iran would be held accountable for the slaughter of its own citizens, help is on the way. If he agreed to a deal, after this massive military buildup, by the way, surrounding Iran right now, how would our enemies perceive that, essentially letting the regime off the hook?
Help is on the way. You know, we have to dot our I's here. We have to go through the motions of these talks. The truth is, the president keeps articulating three primary points that must be agreed to by the Iranians, and the Iranians have rejected all three of them as even being topics of discussion. There's not going to be an agreement. And rumor as of last night is of a second U.S. carrier strike group moving toward the Gulf. Don't know if that's confirmed yet, But the president is assembling just an unbelievable armada in region. And not only that, but there's tremendous amounts of military transport planes flying into the region, believe me, with lots of stuff. Some of that is missile defenses to protect our existing assets. Some of that is highly offensive. And you're seeing F-35s and everything else going in region. And by the way, it's not just us. Some of our NATO allies are participating in that. So I think the Ayatollah will continue to bluster until he can't, just as he did going into the 12-day war. And you see how that ended.
Yeah, we saw the intentional mixed messaging and psychological warfare on behalf of President Trump and Israel prior to the 12-day war. And it seemed, Rod, to lull the Iranian regime into a sense of complacency. Then Israel struck, and the U.S. finished it off with Operation Midnight Hammer, destroying Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. Perhaps we're seeing that sort of swerve once again. Bibi was at the White House yesterday. President Trump saying he wants a deal, but again, could be a smokescreen before action. President Trump has been a man of his word, especially regarding Iran over both of his terms. So the world watches and waits. Folks, more with Dr. Rod Martin after the break. What about Cuba at America's doorstep? Is that regime in trouble because of President Trump's leverage and pressure? And Greenland still on the table? More with Dr. Rod Martin after the break. Stick around. Welcome back to Stakelbeck Tonight. We're talking to our good friend Rod Martin, CEO of Martin Capital and founder of the Rod Martin Report. Rod, I mentioned Venezuela before the break, and they're in trouble now, obviously, after President Trump's decisive move to apprehend Nicolas Maduro. But Cuba, Venezuela's close ally, communist regime 90 miles from Florida, from the south coast of the United States, they seem to be teetering right now. And the Trump administration is turning up the heat. Tell us more about the state of play in Cuba right now and what the fall of that regime would mean for our hemisphere.
Well, the Cuban regime is toast. It's really just a matter of when. They existed for a very long time on the subsidies that came from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is long gone. Russia can't afford to do the things that Cuba needs. And if it tried to, the primary thing Cuba needs is fuel. And the United States will just interdict all those tankers. The president is destroying the shadow fleet as we watch in real time. So without Venezuela to send them oil and indirectly cash, they really are cut off. And they have gotten some oil from the Mexicans. That's ending. China is an importer. They can't send any. They really are on the ropes. And when that regime finally falls, hopefully from within, we've got a shot at a democratic government there, and it will be a paradise once it's free.
Yeah, the Monroe Doctrine is back. Some have called it the Donroe Doctrine under President Trump. Can you talk about how President Trump is transforming, really, the Western Hemisphere?
He actually is, and you're seeing that in the rise of Javier Milei. What's happened in Argentina is just phenomenal. The election victories in Chile and other countries south of our border, and now the Venezuela deal. And yeah, okay, elements of the old regime are still running the country, but they're running it at Donald Trump's direction. And that's going to result in a democratic transition. You'll see the opposition in power probably before the end of this year. And that's just phenomenal. That's a game changer because Venezuela has the ability to be the richest country in the hemisphere aside from the United States. And it would be glorious to see it happen.
Yeah, massive oil wealth, obviously, oil deposits for sure. Hey, moving north, far to the north, Greenland. President Trump was in Davos a few weeks ago, of course, talked once again about acquiring Greenland. Some people have said, why all the fixation on Greenland? Rod, can you break down why Greenland is really essential to America's national security, especially with China and Russia quite literally lurking in those waters?
Greenland's been vital for a long time. We occupied it in World War II because the Germans wanted control of it. And the reason is simple. Any enemy naval craft coming from the eastern part of Europe, whether you're talking about Russia or Nazi Germany, has to come out through either the North Sea or further north, the Arctic, and come into the North Atlantic through that Greenland, Iceland, UK gap that you see on the map right now. If you don't control Greenland, you can't control the North Atlantic, and shipping between NATO allies becomes nearly impossible. So it's vital just for that. But also, if the Arctic sea lanes really are going to open up, whether that's because of global warming or just because of a multiplication of nuclear icebreakers, which is probably much more likely, it becomes a really vital transport node. It's cheaper to ship that route from China to Europe or vice versa than it is to go through the Panama or Suez canals. The Chinese and the Russians are absolutely committed to controlling it. And finally, it's an essential piece of geography for Trump's Golden Dome missile defense. Most Russian nuclear missiles would have to pass over Greenland. It's essential that we be able to detect them and shoot them down from there.
Rod, great breakdown. You just laid out the case completely. It's so vital, that large land mass, that piece of land. Hey, last question. We've been talking international. Can't let you go. About 30 seconds left without asking you about the midterms in November. They're lurking. They're coming up. How are you feeling right now about the midterms? We've heard a lot of chatter. Obviously, it's going to be a blowout. Republicans blown out of the water in this. But how are you seeing the midterms as of now? Still got a long way to go, of course.
The truth is, this should be a Republican blowout. We've got redistricting working in our favor. The Supreme Court is probably going to get rid of these racist, racially gerrymandered districts that are all Democrat-held, which is ridiculous because twice as many black Democrats hold seats that aren't racially gerrymandered. So all of that's nonsense. That's just a sop to the Democratic Party. And on top of that, the economy is just roaring. By middle of this year, you're going to be in the middle of a supply side boom that is like nothing we've ever seen. And that's going to be felt in the pocketbooks of America.
Amen. The stakes are very, very high. On our 250th anniversary, the founding of the United States. Rod, great job as always, my friend. Folks, follow him on X. He is a must follow on X. Check out the Rod Martin Report. Rod, God bless, my friend. Great job. We'll see you again soon. And coming up after the break, Christian Zionism. Catching a lot of criticism these days. Our next guest makes the case for followers of Jesus standing with the one and only Jewish state. That's next. Stick around.